Now here's a topic which personally I find fascinating. Mental self-image. Ego, in other words. Now look, I know that I don't get many viewers on my channel here. My videos don't get many views. I know that. And that's cool. But look, if you have watched any of my previous videos, you might be aware that personally, I've dipped my toe into the whole world of spirituality. I've read a handful of books. I've watched a good number of hours worth of videos regarding all things spiritual. And now, a reoccurring topic in the world of spirituality is ego. The ego. I'll be honest, personally, I don't actually like the word ego. To me, it just conjures up the idea that there is a separate entity within us called the ego, which is wrong. So, look, personally, I like the term mental self-image. It takes a bit longer to say it, but I prefer the term mental self-image over ego. Now, mental self-image, or ego, if you like, plain and simple, ultimately means what you think of yourself. So in other words, mental self-image, ego, is the byproduct of thought, which is also the I within us. Now, personally, I don't believe that there are many people in this world that are completely free of a mental self-image, an ego. Not even the so-called spiritual folk who claim to have dropped their ego or who claim to have no ego. In fact, it's actually a paradox, because as soon as you claim to have no ego, that is your ego. Or in other words, as soon as you claim to have no mental self-image, all that means is you now have a mental self-image of yourself as being someone who has no mental self-image. Do you see that? I don't know if you see that or not. But anyway, look. Personally, I've met a good number of people who don't appear to have any trace of a mental self-image, an ego. My younger brother being one of them. A lovely man he is, my little brother. But look, I've come to see that almost everyone will have some kind of mental self-image of themselves, no matter how subtle or underlying it is. Even if it rarely rears its head, so to speak. You know, I'd like to suggest that for most of us, a mental self-image is there. It is there. It's just dormant. I like that word, dormant. Now, look, I want to come back to these spiritual folk who claim to have completely dropped their mental self-image, dropped their ego, in other words, because I find this fascinating. So look, if you are one of those spiritual folk who's claiming to have no self-image, no ego, let me ask you this. If you were sitting on the toilet, you're sitting on the toilet, taking a shit, maybe you're straining, maybe you're not. I come along and pull up a chair and sit in front of you to watch you while you're having a poop, while you're taking a shit. What would happen then? You'd become embarrassed. right? Now, obviously, you don't know me personally, but even if it was your best friend, you're taking a shit, your best friend pulls up a chair in front of you and sits there watching you, you'd still be embarrassed, right? Now, if you had no mental self-image, no ego, in other words, you wouldn't be embarrassed, would you? Embarrassment can only arise if you have a mental self-image. Do you see that? Now look, the hypothetical scenario of someone sitting in front of you, watching you while you're taking a poop, is a bit extreme. I know that, but look, it doesn't have to be that extreme. Getting up at a party, if you've ever been invited to a party and someone asks you to get up and dance, you might find that embarrassing. I don't know if you've ever had it where you'll be with a group of people, a group of your family or a group of friends, and someone from the group says, "Here, you do that impression, do that Scottish impression you're really good at, or do that Italian impression you're really, whatever. Do that impression you're really good at." You might get embarrassed because someone's putting you on the spot in front of all your family or all your friends, and suddenly the spotlight's on you, so to speak, and you might become embarrassed. Or if someone out of the group, asks you to sing something, sing that song. You might feel embarrassed singing in front of people, or doing an impression in front of people. You know what I'm saying? Can you relate to this? Or if you was out in public, you're out in public and someone creeps up behind you, whips your trousers down so your little willy pops out, your little winky pops out for everybody to see. You know what I'm saying? You might find that embarrassing. Some men don't even like taking their t-shirt off in public. You know how it is. So again, if you're that person who claims to have no mental self-image, if you're one of these spiritual folk, or maybe you're not a spiritual folk, maybe you just claim to have no mental self-image, no ego, can you honestly say that you wouldn't be embarrassed by any of those scenarios which I've just mentioned? Can you honestly say you wouldn't be embarrassed by at least one of those scenarios which I just mentioned? Come on now. Most people would be embarrassed by at least one of those scenarios. Surely. Definitely sitting on the toilet and someone watching you while you take a shit. And most likely the pulling your pants down scenario as well. I'm sure we'd all be embarrassed by that. Now you might be watching this and you might say, embarrassment has nothing to do with mental self-image or ego, whatever you like to call it. Well, of course it does. If you don't have a mental self-image, if you don't have a mental self-image, you cannot be embarrassed. Simple as that. So look, you might not have a mental self-image in the sense that you don't think yourself all high and mighty, or you don't think yourself as being superior to anybody else, but I'm suggesting most of us have an underlying, dormant mental self-image which can rear its head and take you by surprise at any moment, at any time, making you feel embarrassed or uncomfortable. And personally, I find that fascinating. I don't know whether you do also, but So this means that most people have a mental self-image. It is there. It's in there within you. It's just dormant. Now, there are some people who genuinely have no mental self-image at all, but I want to save that. I want to go into that in the next video, in part 2. So listen, what am I saying here? What I'm saying is, don't get involved with the whole idea of intentionally dropping your mental self-image. Or in other words, don't get involved with the whole idea of intentionally dropping your ego, because you can't. You know, it's a paradox, as I said at the start of the video. So all it comes down to is this question. As you go about your daily life, how are you operating? Are you operating through a mental self-image, an ego? Or in other words, is your mental self-image the root of how you operate? Is it? Live your life and see. That's the answer. All the best. Take care.